Picture your dinner table right now. It probably feels less like a place to share a meal and more like a tense hostage negotiation. You spend hours pureeing, bargaining, and secretly hiding green vegetables inside sweet foods just to get a single bite into your toddler. The anxiety builds with every refused plate. You feel guilty, exhausted, and you eventually start to believe your child is simply wired to hate food. You are not alone. Research shows up to half of all toddlers in Western countries are classified as picky eaters. Yet, across the globe in Japan, this chronic mealtime battle is almost completely unheard of. Most modern parenting advice tells you to just keep offering the food, make it look fun, or mask the taste in a fruit smoothie. This advice is completely broken. The standard Western approach to feeding babies, relying on perfectly smooth, sweet purees and constantly catering to the child's preference, is actively building the exact picky eater you're trying to prevent. You are applying band-aids to a problem created during the weaning window. Picky eating is almost never a fixed personality trait. It is the direct outcome of a specific feeding environment. And environments can be changed. Japanese children eat seaweed, fermented soy, bitter vegetables, and fish from the very earliest stages of solid food. They do this not because they are genetically superior, but because of how the feeding relationship is built from day one. Japan holds some of the lowest rates of diet-related illness in the world because their food culture begins in infancy. These are not exotic or difficult techniques. They are simple, low-friction principles you can apply tonight. But do not skip ahead. Habit number 4 covers the single thing most well-meaning parents do at every mealtime that directly teaches their baby to distrust new food. It feels kind, it feels encouraging, and it is doing the exact opposite of what you intend. The first rule is Shun, which means eating with the seasons. In Japan, weaning does not start with a jar of sweetened applesauce. It begins with dashi. This is a simple, savory broth made from seaweed and dried fish flakes. It introduces umami, depth, and slight bitterness long before a baby ever tastes concentrated sweetness. Compare this to the standard Western approach. We instinctively reach for sweet root vegetables like carrots, butternut squash, or sweet potatoes. They are safe, and babies accept them easily. But this easy win comes with a heavy cost. By leading with sweet foods, you actively train the palate to expect sugar and reject complexity. You are building their brain's flavor map in those first few months. You need to interrupt this pattern. This week, introduce one completely non-sweet vegetable before you offer any sweet options. Try a small amount of courgette, steamed broccoli, or bitter greens. Offer it first, while their hunger is highest. Do not mix it with a sweet puree to mask the flavor. Let them experience the raw, natural taste. The second rule is Ichiju Sansai, the principle of variety. A traditional Japanese meal contains one soup and 3 small sides. This structure applies directly to infancy. Babies are rarely given one giant bowl of a single plain food. Variety is the baseline expectation of every meal, not an eventual goal. In the West, we do the exact opposite. We introduce foods one at a time, keeping them completely isolated for days at a stretch. We originally did this to track allergies, but it accidentally taught our children a terrible lesson. It teaches their brain that meals are singular, predictable, and perfectly simple. When you suddenly introduce a mixed plate a year later, the child panics and rejects it. You have to normalize variety early. At your baby's next meal, offer 2 or 3 small distinct components. Keep the portions tiny. Leave intentional empty space between the items on the tray. In Japanese aesthetics, this physical pause is known as mao. A crowded plate triggers visual anxiety for a toddler. Empty space creates a calm visual environment and removes the pressure to perform. They do not need to eat all of it. Familiarity begins through sight and smell long before it ever becomes taste. The third rule is the ancient principle of Hara Hachi. This translates to eating until you are 80% full. In Japanese households, this is taught implicitly from the very beginning of solid feeding. Portions are kept small, meals remain calm, and children are trusted to regulate their own intake. Compare this to the Western clean plate culture. We obsess over finishing everything. We measure a baby's intake against charts and tracking apps. This pressure completely overrides the baby's natural hunger and fullness signals. It trains them to eat past the point of satiety and permanently disconnects them from their own body's internal cues. At your next meal, serve a much smaller portion than usual. When your baby turns away or loses interest, immediately stop the meal. Do not offer one more spoon. Do not encourage one more bite. Trust that their body knows exactly what it needs. This single shift begins the critical process of rebuilding their natural relationship with hunger. Now we reach the fourth rule. This is the exact trap I warned you about at the beginning. In Japanese feeding culture, eating is treated as a completely ordinary event. There is no applause when a baby finishes a bowl. There is no celebration when they try something new. There is no visible anxiety when they refuse a bite. Food is entirely neutral. The parent's emotional state does not attach to what the child consumes. Western parents do the exact opposite, usually with the best intentions. We cheer loudly when they eat well. We show visible concern or frustration when they refuse. This teaches the baby two highly dangerous things. First, it teaches them that eating is a performance designed to produce a reward. Second, it teaches them that refusing food gives them immense power over your emotions. Both of these outcomes heavily entrench picky eating. At your next mealtime, practice a completely neutral face, regardless of what happens. No clapping, no saying good job, and no anxious second attempts. Place the food down, eat your own meal alongside them, and let the entire experience be unremarkable. Neutrality is the goal. Neutrality is the repair. The fifth rule is Kodawari. This represents a deep attention to detail, specifically regarding texture. Japanese weaning moves through textures deliberately and quickly. Babies transition from soft to lumpy to chewy on a set schedule. They are offered real food with actual physical structure, not an endless supply of smooth paste. In the West, we rely heavily on extended puree feeding. We wait for the baby to signal they are ready for lumps. This is backwards. Keeping food perfectly smooth for too long delays the development of the oral motor skills needed for chewing. It makes the jaw muscles lazy. It dramatically increases texture sensitivity later in childhood. Many cases of severe toddler picky eating trace directly back to a weaning period that stayed perfectly smooth for far too long. If your baby is past the initial introduction stage, introduce one lumpy or soft solid texture this week. Offer a mashed component rather than a blended one. Progress the texture on a gentle, consistent schedule instead of waiting for permission. The sixth rule is Shokuiku, or daily food education. In Japan, building a healthy relationship with food involves consistent exposure to where it comes from. This starts long before a spoon ever reaches a mouth. Children see how food is prepared. They learn what it looks and smells like in its raw form. In modern households, food simply appears. It arrives pre-packaged, pre-portioned, and completely disconnected from its origin. Toddlers have absolutely zero relationship with their meal before it is placed in front of them. Because they lack this context, any new food feels threatening rather than interesting. You need to close this gap. Apply the concept of kankyo sibi, the practice of intentional environmental arrangement. Clear the kitchen of loud toys and distractions. Let your baby be present during the actual food preparation. Sit them safely in a high chair nearby while you wash vegetables. Let them touch, smell, and observe the raw ingredients before they are cooked. This low-stakes exposure builds deep familiarity. It prevents rejection at the dinner table before the meal has even started. This entire shift was never really about getting your baby to eat more vegetables. It is about the fundamental feeding relationship itself. It is about the emotional environment, the sensory exposure, and the trust you build or break at every single mealtime. Japanese feeding culture does not fight picky eating because it never creates the conditions for it to take root in the first place. Your goal at the dinner table is no longer compliance. Your goal is curiosity. Do not attempt to implement all 6 of these habits this week. Pick the single rule that describes your current mealtime struggles the most accurately. Start there. Run that one specific habit for 2 solid weeks before adding anything else. Slow, consistent change in your feeding environment is the only thing that produces lasting results. Comment below and tell me which single habit you are starting your next mealtime. Then, subscribe to the channel to keep building the kind of calm, evidence-informed home environment that modern parenting culture rarely teaches.